What's up, people? This is Q2 Quiet, and I am back with more, you know, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And, now that I'm all done with the game, basically, uh, I don't know. I kind of wanted to give my final thoughts, or whatever you want to call it. And, I don't know. I'm conflicted. It's so funny. Recently a lot of games have left me feeling conflicted in a sense that they are good games from, if you look at all the parts and you look at the package, it's a good game for sure. But it is also marred with so much stuff that is actually inherently negative and has kind of taken hold in gaming. And obviously, Ubisoft is one of the. One second, let's let this cutscene play out. Again, I'm not working off script. I'm just kind of saying what I feel. So, forgive me if I
I'm back.
ramble.
And I have everything you need to successfully lie to your people.
Oh, fantastic. And fear not, friend. This is a lie that will save my people. It will put us back on the map. Well, can I, can I have my items now, please?
No. The axe and the armor are mine. You think they could make you look like a Minotaur Slayer? No matter what armor you wear, you'll always be Maurice the Pathetic. You fool no one.
No,
Go home, hero.
Yeah, this is the. Normally, I would have given it to him, but now I'm almost at the point where it's like, uh, you know, nothing matters. But as I was saying, Ubisoft is certainly one of the biggest purveyors that have kind of altered the landscape in gaming, and uh, that that shift is, and I don't want to be reductive here. So when I say this, I want you to understand that I'm going to elaborate on it a bit more. But it becomes quantity over quality. Now, having said that, I am not in any way saying that this is not a high quality game and worthy of a purchase. Even when it was at full price, I would say this probably was still worth the money spent. You certainly got your money's worth, whether all of it was worth it or not. So, but they have this thing, and where you know everything has to be huge. Everything has to, you know, have massive, and it's not just with Assassin's Creed. It's with all of their major franchises. Let's talk about their actual major franchises. Watch Dogs, which, you know, two was bigger than one and more expansive, and sure, certainly it was better, an improvement on one. But that's because one was foundationally flawed, which is not something that Ubisoft often does. Usually their games are extremely competent, and it's not that Watch Dogs wasn't competent, but it was foundationally flawed in the sense of that it set out to, or what it portrayed itself as. And you know, I feel like sure they improved upon the formula and made it better in a lot of ways, but uh, it still just seemed to really focus on, even though it was more narratively focused than this, it still just seemed to meander, And this meanders a ton because of all of this. This entire map that you have to explore. And you see, even after 85 hours, there is still a huge chunk that unexplored. Mount Pangeon is the perfect name because I haven't ever been there. Because thank God it's one of the few places the story didn't force me to. Also, you can see in Messenia or whatever, I wasn't forced. The area, this is explorative. That's just snow. But yeah, there's parts where it didn't force you to go, and I didn't go there, and it's good because I don't think the goal of a game should be to make the map as large as humanly possible and then drag the player. And even if this was, here's the thing, and this is the God's honest truth, if this was one large landmass, it maybe possibly be a bit more tolerable because it would be more easily traversable. But what happens quite often is, you're early in the game and you'll be here, and then they'll say, all right, now you need to go, now you need to go, whatever, here. And you're like, okay, I can get there. And then you realize that, oh, once I get there, I don't have a way to get to the next place, which is over here. And then you're like, well, shit, how do I get there? Well, I guess that's when you travel. That's not that bad. And then you get there and you do a couple of little quests, and then it's like, all right, dude, that was good of you. Now come all the way over here, which you've never been. And you're like, well, okay, that's fine. And you clear things along the way. You say, all right, I'm going to slowly wipe out all of the things in my path. But then the game kind of it's just, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you get my drift, where it feels like the game is constantly dragging you along for the sake of justifying the large map, which doesn't wouldn't need to be justified if it wasn't as large as it was. And if we're going to be real, a lot of the locations are wholly redundant and uninteresting and serve as nothing but filler. You really, out of whatever, the 25 to 30 islands and the 10 to 12 like landmass areas, or whatever, 8 landmass areas, only a few of them are really important. And I feel like the game could have told a much more concise story that would have kept the player engaging with the story at all times. And that is Ubisoft's biggest flaw. They're and it's, again, I mentioned this before, but let's think about all of their major franchises. They have obviously Assassin's Creed, and we can see where this is headed and where it's been headed consistently since Assassin's Creed 1. Basically, they just said, let's get bigger, let's get bigger. And then the first couple of times, you're like, yeah, let's get bigger. But then you're like, wait, why are we getting bigger? And then they went smaller but worse with a couple of them. But then they said, oh, well, people didn't like smaller but worse. It's like, yeah, but people would have liked smaller but better. But they didn't understand that. So then they said, let's just get bigger, 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 bigger. And now we are where we are. And I want you to also think about the Tom Clancy franchise. Think about fucking the very first Tom Clancy video game, Rainbow Six, which Siege is, a multiplayer version of what the initial image for the books and Tom Clancy's works were, in the sense of it is a small team in a small, whatever environment that's the stakes are very high, and you have to complete an objective in a way that gets everyone out safe, and that also, leaves you, doesn't take you like 10 hours. You need to do it before something happens. And so it makes sense. But then you start looking at all these other Tom Clancy games. Let's look at the last one, Breakpoint. Okay, fine. And even Wildlands. Wildlands is, again, not that, well, Breakpoint is fucked up from a technical aspect, But even if it wasn't, it's still a, proficient third, you know what I mean, for what it's doing. It's you very Ubisoft. It's like, yeah, okay, this is what I would expect from a Ubisoft. And same with Far Cry. Let's look at Far Cry. It's just, hey, let's do more. Let's make it more. Let's have, and it's not, and with Far Cry they didn't even necessarily go that much bigger, but it's still just more. We'll take out the towers, but we'll add a million other things to do. And then you look at even Far Cry New Dawn, and you start seeing, well, now it's like, let's make it more RPG-ish. Let's make it more of a looter shooter. Yeah, our format was great. Go places, kill people, move on. Go places, kill people, move on, slow, but let's go full looter shooter. Start having everything focus on levels and gear stats, and that will pad the runtime of the game. And regardless of what anybody feels, whether you like it or don't like it, the reality is that the format of the looter shooter is designed to keep the player playing. It's not about reaching a conclusion. It's not about finality. It's not about telling a story. The entire function of looting, shooting, and gear stats and levels, and whatever, respawning gear and respawning drops and high level drops and legendary and epic and rare and regular, like the whole purpose of those things is to keep the player engaged in the core gameplay loop. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But what I am saying is not every single franchise needs to engage with that. And if you are going to engage with that, you should do it in a way that allows the player to constantly engage with the story without ever really feeling like they are playing a grindy looter shooter. And so that's what Far Cry, from Far Cry 3 to 4 to 5, it all became a little bit more RPG-ish, a little bit more, dots on a map, waypoints on a map. It all became just a little bit more. And then they went full looter shooter with New Dawn, basically. And now and again, so we have Assassin's Creed, which this is basically looter shooter without the shooting. This is a core to core looter shooter that has a narrative, and it doesn't work all the time. Not that the narrative isn't great, not that the looting shooting isn't great, but the way that they are combined and the distance and space and time between actual narrative beats that progress the story, and the core function of really doing three or two or three tasks, if we're being real, over and over again, don't necessarily play off of one another very well. But that's where they've taken Assassin's Creed. That's where they've taken that's where they've taken Watch Dogs. That's where they've taken Far Cry. And even if you think about the Crew 2, why do we need, you talk to almost anyone, and I'm not saying everyone, I'm not saying it's universal, but if you talk to the vast majority of people who really love car games, and I'm not talking about I'm talking about all kinds of car games. I'm not saying, oh, they only love simulations, or oh, they only love arcade car games. No, no, no. If you talk to people who love car games, if you ask most of them if they would just prefer a few open roads spanning, thousands of miles, or really it's just hundreds of miles, but still, if you ask them, say, hey, would you rather that, or would you rather expertly designed courses that can allow you to truly flex your skills and speed, and not have it necessarily be about traveling over long distances fast and having the best gear, which that also kind of became a looter shooter. It mostly became about being able to upgrade your car. It's not about necessarily having the most skill. It didn't become about being the best driver. It came about being a good driver, a good enough driver to upgrade your car so that you can do a little bit better. But you're never really testing your skills. There are a few courses and stuff, but it's not, you can tell that wasn't their focus. So you start looking at all of the games that Ubisoft is responsible for, like their major franchises. Which, yeah, the Crew is a smaller one, but that's certainly, I mean, that's certainly something that they are, uh, you know, well, that's what they're aware of. That's where they're moving, and it's just an example of where they're headed and where they've been headed. And another good example, I would say, is Steep. Steep is a great example. Now, the core mechanics of Steep aren't bad. I would say that it's a little simplistic. It gets a little old after a while, in my opinion. And I love snowboarding games. I love Cool Borders. I loved the 1080. I loved Sean White snowboarding. I loved all the games. You know what I mean? And Skate 2 is one of my favorite games. That's probably one of my top 50 favorite games of all time. So I love those kinds of games. But the problem with Steep is that they decided to go this Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where now it's several large mountainscapes and you pick and choose your points. But here's the problem, and again, even if you're more of a simulation style person, and it's not that it's bad and it's not that it's unenjoyable, it's that the experience feels hindered by their by Ubisoft's tendency to try to overwhelm the player with choice and overwhelm the player with space, when a lot of times a lot of people would prefer a tailored experience, something that and even if you want to work a narrative in there, again, Skate had a narrative. Skate was a huge area, huge, massive area, but it never felt daunting, and it was very easy to progress the story, and you didn't necessarily feel like you had to disengage. And with Steep, it's not really that deep because it's not like there's not RPG mechanics necessarily or anything like that, but it's just an example of them choosing space over tailor-made experience. They're saying, well, if we give people the experience to make their own experience, then there's nothing to complain about. But that's not really why a lot of people play. I mean, you want to have the freedom to do to make your own experience, but you don't want the entire experience kind of made into this thing that you have to overcome, where I just want to snowboard, I just want to drive a car and be able to drift around corners, and you know what I mean, learn when to brake by kind of learning how the car maneuvers at certain angles with certain turns. Or but you can't do that if you're just going to give me a big open world to start racing across. It's just less enjoyable. Or I don't want to have to play Far Cry and start worrying about gear stats and start worrying about levels being way too high leveled and having to stop the game to grind out a few camps and stuff like that for a couple of hours. Or I don't want to have to play, and it's also just counter to the entire purpose of the game. Think about Assassin's Creed. Think about Assassin's Creed 1, which was the last Assassin's Creed I played in full. I played a little bit of Black Flag, I played a little bit of 2, but Assassin's Creed 1 is the only game besides this one that I've completed in full. In that game, it was really a lot more cerebral. it wasn't just this mindless, I'll walk up. I mean, you can walk up and do your thing, but you couldn't because there's going to be people. Everyone's going to see you. You had to even think about where and when. Sure, you could climb anything at any time, but depending on where you were, people might notice, and that might draw attention to you, and that might get you called out. You climb in front of a building in front of the wrong guy, not just some building where they say, "Oh, you can't go here because there's a treasure chest here," like they do in this game, but just out in the public, which is where you spent almost all your time. You're either on the rooftops or you're out amongst the people. This game, you're just out on your own. And even when you go amongst the people, you can knock them over. You can just push through them. I mean, you really have to try to do anything to get. You can just climb buildings as long as it's not marked as like an enemy in building. And all of the enemies are unless you just want to pick a fight with someone. The only time you'll ever have an actual fight in public might be with a mercenary if you have a bounty, maybe, but usually the mercenaries don't get to you till you're in a camp or you're clearing out a fort or something like that. So, or when you're out in the wild, that right after you've cleared out a fort, right before you. So there's very little reason for all of the, it looks pretty. This, I love going to Athens. It looks so beautiful. Oh, going to Sparta was amazing. But one, there's way too many reused assets. But two, and that again, that wouldn't be as big of a thing if the map wasn't so big. But when the map is so huge and the locations and are way more limited than you might think, you start noticing segments of cave. Like you can see that the way that they design caves isn't kind of an organic thing. It's literally made by sections. Like this is a hallway section. This is a section with a big stalagmite that has a little and you start even with tombs. Same thing with tombs. Okay, this hallway is gonna have a snake in it. This hallway is gonna have a pile of old treasure in it. This hallway is gonna have a wall that you start learning the layouts before you even do them, because even the layouts of the areas, not just assets, but the actual layouts of areas are reused. Certainly assets are reused, but and that's to be expected to a degree. But again, it wouldn't be as noticeable if the game wasn't so big, because they wouldn't have to go to the same well so many times. And that's just one of the ways that this hurts Assassin's Creed as an Assassin's Creed game. Two, guess what? Because of levels and also because you are underpowered, you know what else that means? That means that you're not necessarily going to be able to actually assassinate people. You remember in the first one, it was just about getting close enough to your target to deliver that death blow. And sure, you had like a specific type of enemy that would, be able to survive that. But that was a very specific type of enemy. In general, you stab somebody in the neck with a blade right through their neck and pull it out, it goes through the other side, they're dead. But in this game, it depends. I mean, if they're your level, probably not, unless it's a no armor archer. But anybody else, they're probably going to survive it, at least with some health. Some, you charge up and do a kill, like a stealth attack, and it takes off 25% of their health, and they just turn around and look at you, and then you have to hero strike them, and then you have to use your overpowered strikes just so that they don't alert everybody right there, and now you're down, you don't have any adrenaline, so the next guy that you go to stealth kill, you'll take off 25% of his health. And this is with you focusing on assassin. You can play the game as you want. You can focus on warrior, you can focus on archer, you can focus on a hunter, you can focus on assassin. Even with you focusing on all assassin points, you are not going to be able to put down every enemy. Not even half the enemies. Not even a quarter of the enemies. Especially if all you try to do is engage with the story. You have to stop to grind to level up just to be able to be proficient. 1 second, my pizza's here. Hey, stop. Hello, how are you today? Good, how are you? Cat's trying to get out. No, stay. Yes. All right. Christmas pizza is here. Yes, so I'm back. Yes. I just had to get my Christmas pizza. But yeah, I think that it's problematic when a game loses its identity in the attempt to try to touch everything. Do you understand? And I also think it's very it's troubling when a game tries to push a narrative, but then has that narrative kind of fall to the side or on the back burner while you mostly engage with the core gameplay loop. And also, I think it's troubling when you have a very, 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 very large game and the gameplay loop and options, not saying, oh, you get to hunter assassin. Nope, shut up. The actual gameplay loop itself and the options the game gives you are very limited. And I mentioned this in my last video, but here it is. Look, in this game, you have three types of missions, I think. You have kill missions, where your goal is to kill a fort. Not even like, oh, like kill the pole marks of Athene, kill 3 pole marks of Athenian fort. That's a quest. No, no, no. That is not a quest. Telling me as a actual quest given by a quest giver to go kill 3 pole marks of a fort. Those are 3 side quests, and those are also 3 things that you naturally would do. So they're telling you to play the game. And maybe by doing 3, you're forced to focus on 3 things that you wouldn't normally focus on at once. But that isn't interesting or new. That's the core gameplay loop. The second is, hey, my husband can't get a hard on. Could you go pick some flowers in the forest for me? And I'm thinking like, okay, I'm gonna get there and there's gonna be like a bunch of bandits and I'm gonna have to clear it out. Or, nope, I just picked them, ran around, picked them up, and then ran back to them and said, "I'll fuck your wife instead." But gathering, looting, that is the core. And sure, the mission was funny, and that's one of the few missions where the character, or the story itself stood out. But in general, just telling somebody go get something, that's the core gameplay loop. And then the other thing you really have, I guess, you have the kill missions, you have this, and then you have the save missions where you're like, oh, my wife is missing or my son is missing. Could you go get them for me? And you basically just go find wherever they are. And here's what's crazy: even if you run into a fort You could run into a fort, run right to the prisoner cell that you eye with your drone eagle, and then you just let the person go. They're gonna make it out of there, no problem. And then you just run out of the other side around the back and meet them in the front about 70 meters away, and that's the mission. And it's like, okay, fine, that's still something that you would do. Maybe you wouldn't just let the person go and run away, but if you're in a fort and you're clearing a fort, or you're clearing a bandit camp, or you're clearing, a cave, you're going to free the people that you see anyways. So I don't understand how every mission, and then you have the ship battles. I'd say that's the other thing. You have the ship battle. Oh, ship combat. Fuck the ship combat. It's, again, not that it's bad. One, it is bad because you do hit points in the main storylines where you have to engage with ship battle. And then that's not, again, it doesn't come down to skill, it doesn't come down to technique, because I mean, there's certainly, I'm not saying there isn't skill and technique. I'm saying ultimately you have to grind to level up your ship. You need to level up your ship to the point where you're going to be as strong as most of the other ships, which is hard to do. So you're spending a ton of resources, which means grinding a bunch of olive wood, means grinding a bunch of drachmi, it means grinding a bunch of pelts. So everything grinds to a halt while you spend a couple hours leveling up your ship so that you can have one big battle. And then you're like, all right, well, that's, at least I have a strong ship now. Until 30 hours later, when you say, oh man, I have to take down the gods of the Aegean. Those fuckers are all in ships, and they're all strong, and they're all really, you know what I mean? They all have, it's not just one ship. Four of them have small fleets with them, so you gotta rush in, damage them, and rush out, or hopefully they come in at an angle where you're gonna be. It's a whole thing, but also that means more grinding. This was the last branch I did because I had to do a bunch of ship grinding to level up my ship to get it, you know, at a point where it could. And look, that's that. All of these, the family lieutenants, and all of this is the only reason. But that took so much. I mean, even look how much the next level is. Talking 5,000 wood, 5,600 pelts, 1,800. I mean, like, come on, 1,800 metal, like iron metal, 132,000 drachmi. That's just grind. It's just, hey, do it because it's grindy, and they don't give you a purpose to do the ship battles enough for them to make you grind as much as you have to, because the cultist storyline is one of the main storylines. There's three main storylines. I haven't even gotten onto how ineffective the story can be. It is a great story. I would say two of the three storylines are actually really good. Really, really, really good. But their presentation hurts the overall impact because there's so much grinding, because they wanted to make it a looter shooter, an adventure looter shooter. They wanted it to be Breath of the Wild mixed with Assassin's Creed OG mixed with, God of War. It's just, they wanted too much, and you have to focus the scope if you want to create a concise experience. And again, it doesn't mean that what they made wasn't. I have to keep stressing that. I liked it. Hell, I haven't played fucking 83 hours of a game in a week. In God knows, in ever. I can honestly say that I haven't played 83 hours of one game in 1 week. I mean, maybe besides like Silent Hill 1, just playing it over and over again, speedrunning it. But I mean, this game fucking took the cake. I gave it all the time in not much time. So I like the game. I just think that the experience is not as impactful because of your inability to engage with it in a way that makes it feel cohesive. And a good example of how they could have done it would have been like, I mean, a God of War, where yeah, sure, there's gear and all that stuff and stats, but guess what? At every moment of the game, you're engaging with the story. And I know, oh well, it's not open world. It's like, listen, I understand that. I'm saying that there are ways that you can make a game feel open while also feeling concise. And I'm also saying that Assassin's Creed, not every Ubisoft franchise needs to be huge open worlds. They could have picked the city of Athens and really made the entire city, and not just like a small thing, but they could have made it huge. Huge. They could have made Athens and Sparta and had the whole story take place here and maybe just one or two islands, and it still would have been great and it would have been better and it would have been more concise. They could have had things matter, things like people seeing you do stuff. They not just stealing, even when people didn't see you steal, they somehow see you. I'm talking about like, yeah, you could draw attention to yourself. You could build up a rep. You could hide in alleys. Things like cutting corners and climbing could actually matter. There's just so much more they could have done because they've done it before. I mean, in older games they did the Assassin Creed better. This might be a better game, but it is not a better Assassin's Creed game. And I think that is my final point because I'm hungry, it's Christmas, and I want to eat. But this is a good game, but it is not a good Assassin's Creed game. And I don't really like the fact that Ubisoft feels we need to make every single franchise this expansive open world that is mostly designed to get as much time out of the player. I would rather than I would. That's why I really don't buy Ubisoft games for that reason. But I would rather them make concise experiences because they obviously have the ability to tell a good story. They just don't know how to pace a story. And with that, I give Assassin's Creed Odyssey a 7. A good game. It probably could have been an 8, 8.5, 9, had they had a lot more focus and fixed. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I didn't even touch on, which I might do at another point or something if I ever sit down and write a script. But yeah, a 7. Have a Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Saturnalia, whatever you celebrate or don't celebrate. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time.